Hello friends, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Danny and today it's time for another Chonky Check-In. If you are new here and have not seen an episode of Chonky Check-Ins before, I will have a playlist linked below so you can go and look at all of my Chonky reads, but this is essentially a series that I talk about my most recent Chonky books, and I define that as a book over 500 pages. Most of them are fantasy, but every once in a while I'll throw in another genre, and really it's just a way for me to encourage myself, remind myself to pick up the Chonky books that I love, because most of the time I enjoy reading books that are very big. And yeah, this is just my way of doing that and then sharing with you guys the stories that I find, which ones I have adored, which ones I absolutely hated, and hopefully you can find a book that you'll love on this list. I have 10 books for you guys as usual, and I will go from my lowest rated to my highest rated, and then at the end I will talk through some fun stats with you guys on what I have found with this set of Chonky reads. If you guys watched my most recent Bucket Listathon update, you probably have heard me talk about the first one, but my lowest rated Chonky read of this episode is going to be When the Moon Hatched. I ended up rating this a 1-star. This is a fantasy romance, and that genre has been not so lucky with love with me, I guess. I don't want to say that it's down and out and that I will never love a romantasy, but this one definitely was not it. If you haven't heard of When the Moon Hatched, which I very much doubt, but if that's the case, you have a main character whose name is Rave. You do get multiple POVs in here, but I would say Rave is our main perspective that you're in throughout the entire story, and she is an assassin that has a dark past, and a past that you as the reader, and for some of it, her as a character, don't really realize and don't know about. And so that's part of the intrigue of the storyline. You follow her and her fight for justice within this city that has none for especially the poor and underprivileged people in the community, and that's where you start out with Rave. You also have a love interest in the story that I won't tell you too much about, but he adds another dynamic and another kind of kingdom politics to the storyline, and so he was probably the saving grace, if there is one, for me in the storyline. But you have this world that has 3 main kingdoms. It is a planet that doesn't really rotate, and so you have a city that is on the dark side of the planet, a city that's kind of right in the middle, and then a city that is on the sunny side of the planet. So it's the burn, the fade, and the shade. And within these cities, they have different kings and different kingdom politics. You also have fantastical creatures involved. We have dragons and a past with the dragons. There are a whole bunch of moons in the sky that are actually the dead dragons of the past. And you also have elemental abilities that are being introduced within this world. What I did not enjoy about the story was the fact that there are so many fantastical things in here that are really cool but are never developed. And the language in this book, I think, was a really big barrier for me. I do not think that being overly descriptive makes the language beautiful. I think if you are going to be overly descriptive, it needs to have purpose, and so much of the language in this is really distracting to me. One of the things I did also find annoying was the use of male and female instead of man and woman, or something else entirely, just referring to the male that walks into the bar. It just was very jarring every time it came on page, and I didn't enjoy that aspect. The romance also is, I know that they say that this is like a slow burn, but it's really, there's really not a romance. I would say it's more of an infatuation, and there's no emotional character building within the story whatsoever. And so by the time the romance did happen, I didn't care about any of the characters or what was happening. Also, that I didn't like the main character either. There wasn't much that I ended up enjoying about the storyline. I kept reading because there were these really intricate moments of the fantasy world, these little creatures that the author would introduce, but then we would never see again. And so, yeah, this one just wasn't for me. Next, we have City of Brass, which I rated a 2.75. And this one was in my Battle of the Booktubers round 3 vlog. So if you want a plethora of thoughts right as I finished reading it, you can go and see that video. I'll link it in the cards and down in the description below. But in general, I know that this series is so well loved, and I have absolutely loved Chakraborty in the past. I love Amina, but this book was just not it for me, friends. You follow 2 main characters, one of which is a girl who, well, young adult, maybe young woman. I don't really remember how old she was. She was probably between the ages of 18 and 22. But she is a kind of a con artist, and she ends up getting mixed up into some things that she doesn't understand and ends up calling a djinn to her and gets mixed up in some politics of Daevabad, which is the city of the Deva, which are djinn but aren't djinn. There's like 2 separate factions that are okay with the term djinn and one that's not okay with the term djinn. And you end up figuring out that she has a role to play within the kingdom politics of Daevabad. You also follow the Deva that she ends up coming into contact with and his backstory as well. I think that for me, one, I've really tried to push the story out of my brain. And so I don't have details for you as far as like what specifically irritated me within this storyline. I do know that at the end I was so confused on what was happening. There was a lot of questions that would be asked but never answered. And then at the end, we just were kind of thrown a whole bunch of information that to me didn't make sense. And I feel like I understand it's a series and that there are going to be answers later on that would develop some of the things that we learn throughout the story. But I also am a person who, if I'm reading a series, I'm okay with cliffhangers, but some questions have to be answered throughout the story, especially in a chonky book. This book was 532 pages. You can't tell me that you can't answer any questions in that amount of time. I know that was one of my frustrations within the City of Brass, but I just also don't know that I care enough about the characters to continue on. I've had many people talk about the fact that there are more questions that are answered in book 2 and that the series gets better as it goes. But I've also heard that the relationship components may or may not get better for me in book 2. I really did not like the romance that was budding between some of the characters in the book. And so I don't know that I'm not going to continue the series. It's not that I don't know. I'm not going to continue the series. I am very sad. I await the second book in the Amina al-Sarafi series. I would be happy to continue that one, but as far as this beloved series goes, it's a no from me. Luckily, those 2 books were the only 1s and 2 stars, and I had no 3 stars. So we are going to jump up to a 4.25 star with 11/22/63. This was another Battle of the Booktubers read. I read this for round 4, so I will have that linked in the cards and down in the description too if you guys want more of my thoughts as I'm reading through the book. But if you haven't heard of this Stephen King, this is a historical book by Stephen King that is about time travel. So you have a man who, with events that have happened, realizes that there is a portal back to 1958. And he gets information that essentially tells him that he can change that timeline and that will impact his future timeline. And when he returns to the future timeline, only 2 minutes has passed. And so you essentially follow his journey in trying to save JFK. And there's so much more to the story than that. This book is over 800 pages, and so there are a lot of details that I'm not going to be able to give you in a little video like this, but I can tell you that I was so surprised how enamored I was while reading this storyline. I do not read historical fiction typically. It's not something that really interests me. I have to have a lot of interest in the specific timeline and time frame in order for me to stay engaged while reading a historical fiction book. And so the fact that this main character, who really is not special in any way, I wouldn't say that he was particularly engaging or like chosen. He's not smart. He doesn't have, and I'm not saying that he's like the worst character ever, but he kind of is just an average guy, which I think worked for me. The character development in this and the life that he sets up for himself in 1958 to live through, 1963 within this time frame was very interesting, and the characters did kind of pull at your heartstrings in this really simplistic, like hometown feel. But along with that, I think that King did a really good job of reminding us that the past is not always good. Like, it can be very nostalgic and heartwarming to think back on past times, but he also points the light at different things in this time frame that we have grown from as a society, and I think that was really important too. So yeah, this was a good read. This is my second Stephen King. I need to figure out where to go next. Next is another 4.25. It's also another Battle of the Booktubers read. This was Rage of Dragons, and I read this for round 4. So it's also in that round 4 vlog that 11/22/63 is in. So same video if you guys want to go and watch that to get more of my information while I'm reading those two storylines. But with Rage of Dragons, this is a book I had put off for a really long time. Mainly because I know that it's war-centric, it's battle-centric, and that's not always my thing. And I was pleasantly surprised with this one as well, clearly, since my rating was a 4.25. But we follow Tao, I think is his name, if I remember correctly. And he is in a kingdom where you have a defined caste system between commoners and nobility. You also have a caste system within the commoners and within the nobility, and that limits what you can do not only socially and workplace-wise, but also within the military. And his father is one of the highest commoners, I think, that you can be, and his mother is a lower or lesser noble. I can't remember exactly what they called them. But in this kingdom, your bloodline, your amount of nobility is actually determined by your mother's instead of your father's. And so Tao does have more ability to reach certain places than his father does. And they are set in a kingdom that is ravaged by war. And you get some backstory at the very beginning as well as when this war started. But you have two peoples who are living in the same space they don't want to be, and you have dragons involved as well. Obviously, Rage of Dragons, but I would say dragons are very much a minimal part of the storyline. More of the story is the kingdom politics and the battles that Tao goes through. This is also a revenge story. I won't tell you specific events that happen in the storyline because I do think that that was part of the shock value to me at the beginning of where this author goes with this particular character. But Tao does seek vengeance on the nobility, and his actions in the storyline, the events that he goes through, and the steps that he takes are all for his revenge of this particular event in his life. And I just really liked the character. I liked Tao. I liked the surrounding characters as well. But the fact that he is hellbent on getting his revenge, and you get to see how stupid some of the things he does are, but also the people who are around him, who some of them understand and some of them don't. Some of them get wrapped up in his, I don't want to call them shenanigans because it's kind of more serious than that, but yeah, it was a really intricate storyline of revenge that I don't know if I have read before. The dragons are also interesting, and I'm hoping that the second book will get more into how the dragons interact. We get a little bit of that, but I would have liked more in the original storyline. The kingdom politics in this were also pretty detailed, and the information that you get as well about the spiritual realm, the powers of these individuals, which I didn't talk about at all, but you have men and women who have different types of powers. Women have the power to, or some women have the power to interact and engage with dragons and have dragons kind of be at their beck and call. And then men have the ability to become more powerful and become enraged, almost like berserker style. And so that was an interesting part of the story as well. You get to learn a little bit about the magic system here too. So I'm curious to see how this series continues. Next, we are on to our 4.5s, and the first on that list is Valor by John Gwynne. This is the second book in the Faithful and the Fallen series. I have not continued with the series yet, and I am dying to. The first book in this series is Malice, which I have right up here. And I do think that this book is probably a little bit weaker than Malice for me, but I did still really enjoy it. I can't tell you much about this because it is a sequel in a series, but just know that in The Faithful and the Fallen, you are following a lot of characters, but two specific characters that you know are going to be bigger in the grand scheme of things. You have one who is a farm boy and one who is a king's son who is gathering a war band because there are events that are happening in this kingdom that symbolize a larger war to come. The farm boy's storyline is also interconnected with kingdom politics, but I'm not going to tell you how because I think that that is part of the intrigue within this storyline. I think that where this particular series shines for me is with the characters, but there are a lot of them. So just be aware. This is one that I have decided that as I'm reading it, I have to read it immersively. I tried to read the first book on audio, and it doesn't stick with me because of how many character names there are. And so immersive reading it is how I'm going about it. And I have been purchasing it as I've gone through. So I need to purchase the third book so I can continue in this series. Another 4.5 is The Gods Below by Andrea Stewart. And this was just a really fun series starter. I don't know how it's going to continue. I am interested to find out. So this will be another series that I continue with. If you don't know who Andrea Stewart is the author of The Bone Shard Daughter, and that series which is called The Drowning Empire, which I absolutely loved. And so getting to see another intricate fantasy world by this author was very fun. We have Andrea Stewart playing with POVs once again. We have, I think, 5 POVs, but there are 2 main perspectives, and they are the 2 sisters within this world. So in this world, you have, I can't remember what they call them, but it's like recreations of entire countries that would be redone by the gods. So what that means is if you are caught in this country or this landscape while a god is redoing it, you would either disappear, think like the Thanos snap, or you would be remade into something that is changed, whether or not that gives me horns or wings or a different lung system so I can breathe in the environment that it's in. So that is happening to kingdoms all over this world. And there is no clear path from kingdom to kingdom. You have to have transport that is controlled by the government. And so that has caused issues because you can escape the recreation. It has a different name in the series, but you can escape it if you have money and can pay to move along to a place that hasn't been recreated. But if you are poor or underprivileged or just don't have access to this ability to go to a different place, then you get trapped and you either are going to disappear or you're going to be remade. And the center of the story here is you have 2 sisters that are very young and should not really have to make the decisions that they made. But the older one is trying to take care of the younger one and they end up getting separated, and you follow their storylines in this really massive story. I don't know if I want to give you much more than that because I don't want to spoil anything for you. I went into this book blind and I had a lot of fun with it. There is a character in this book that I do just want to mention because I really liked him. He is kind of a rough and gruff, very large, burly-like person, but all he cares about is taking care of cats. And there are multiple instances within the book that he makes it his duty to protect cats at the expense of everyone else around him, which I just love and I can relate to so much. So I had a lot of fun with this. I'm excited to see where the series goes. It has its flaws for sure. It's definitely, I did not like this as much as I liked the Bone Shard Daughter, but I will say I think the Bone Shard Daughter went downhill for me the more I read into the series. I think the first book in that series is the strongest, and so I'm hoping with The Gods Below that the second book will increase and kind of up its game and will have kind of a reverse effect from what I thought of the first series by this author. So we'll see, fingers crossed. Lastly, we have all of the 5 stars because I have 4 5 stars from this collection of books. So I'm excited to tell you guys about them. The first I will tell you about is actually the one that I just finished reading, and that is Captain's Fury. This is book 4 of the Codex Alera series by Jim Butcher, which I have just been absolutely eating up. This is the first 5 star that the series has gotten from me though, so it is an increase. And I think it's because I've gotten to know the characters so well that the emotional connections and the conversations that were had in this book about some revelations that the characters have throughout the storyline were very meaningful and emotional to me. And there were probably 3 or 4 times throughout the storyline that I cried. Just because, and it wasn't necessarily a sad cry, it was almost like a growth of characters, and it made me smile and it made me tear up. And so I had a lot of fun. Because it's the 4th book in a series, I can't tell you much about the plot, but I can tell you that it is a massive kingdom where you are following, our main character is Tavi, who in the first book is a shepherd, and he is in a society that has elemental powers, and most people have some type of elemental powers. They call them Furies, and he does not. He is one that is without any connection to the elementals, which is very rare, and it puts him at a disadvantage being a teenage boy in a town with other teenage boys who are going to separate him because of his differences. And you get to learn about how he is different in this kingdom. And you also have other characters involved that have control of the Furies in different ways. We get to see betrayals within the kingdom factions. You have a kingdom at war with outside races, but you also have a kingdom that is at war within itself because the leader of the realm has no heir and is older. So you also have people who are fighting for who's going to be next in line type of thing. And so there's a lot of kingdom politics, a lot of also racial divides. And what I mean by that is you have humans and you have other races throughout the kingdom itself, and there's bad blood in that. And so you have to figure out the cultural divide there to figure out how they're going to get along, if they're going to get along, if they're going to go to war together. So it's such a massive series. I don't know that I could say much else, but I've had a lot of fun with it. The next 5 star is The Hero of Ages, which is a reread, but I still have to shout it out. This is the 3rd book in Mistborn Era 1, and it is absolutely my favorite series ending of all time. I have never read a series that ends in a way that this book does that moves me as much as the ending does here. And so it's the end, so I can't tell you anything about the plot that happens in it, but if you haven't heard of Mistborn, you are following a main character named Ven, who is, I think, a teenager when the book starts. I can't remember exactly how old she is, but she's a little bit of a street rat. And she thinks that the reason she gets away with as much as she does is because of luck, essentially. And she is taken under the wing of someone who realizes that she actually has more power than she knows. And he happens to be the leader of a gang of thieves that is planning a heist of the Lord Ruler. If you think of a storyline where you have good versus evil and the evil person wins, that is the story that Vin is living at the very beginning. And so this ragtag gang of thieves decide to steal from the evil villain that is ruling over the kingdom. And you get to follow in their steps and how they're going to do this, and you get to learn the kingdom politics and everything like that. It's a lot of fun. But it gets very big, and the ending of this, I wish I could read it again for the first time because it was so shocking to me. But it was really fun to reread it and see some of the details that I missed the first time, and knowing what I know, being able to look into a specific character's actions and see where they're going to lead. Yes, chef's kiss. Next, we have The Fragile Threads of Power. And this is not a series continuation, but it is a series continuation. It is a companion series to The Darker Shades of Power. It's a sequel series. Is there such a thing? So you do follow some of the same characters that are in that original series, but you get to see, what do I want to tell you about this? There are a lot of things I can't discuss because if I discuss what's in this book, it could potentially spoil The Darker Shades of Power for you. I will tell you that this has a potential of being a favorite series of all time, whereas Darker Shades of Magic, I loved that series. I thought it was so fun, but it was missing components for me, whereas this isn't. And so, and I don't know if that's also because I've gotten to know the characters, I've lived with them for a while. There are new people, don't get me wrong, it's not all of the same people, but I don't know if I'm just more invested because I've lived in the world so long, but I can't wait for the second book in this to come out. And the last 5-star that I have for you guys is Bloody Rose, which I've talked about this in a video before. I actually did a video on whether or not you should continue the series because a lot of people do not like Bloody Rose. They prefer the Kings of the Wild, which is actually right up here, this red book right here. And I love both of them. They are both 5-star. It is a 5-star series for me. But in my unpopular opinion, I actually like Bloody Rose better. If you haven't heard of this series, which is called the Bands series, you follow mercenary bands throughout these storylines, and they are set in a fantastical world where monsters roam the land. And these mercenary bands have been employed by people, civilization, to keep the monsters at bay. And so the first book, The Kings of the Wild, you follow a band of elderly, not even really elderly, but older men who used to be in a mercenary band, and the mercenary band's name was Saga. And one of their daughters becomes trapped in kind of a perilous situation, and they decide to get the band back together to go and rescue the daughter. Bloody Rose, instead of following the same set of characters, we actually follow a younger generation of characters in this storyline, and it is set after the events that happen in Kings of the Wild. So the reason I say I appreciated this book more, even though both of them are fantastic, is because I think I was able to relate to these characters a little bit better. I think the emotional aspect of this storyline was more present for me than it was in Kings of the Wild. I think Kings of the Wild was more humorous, although I have had people in my comments have had conversations about how they found Kings of the Wild to be more emotional. So I think it probably just depends on your perspective, but I have had a lot of fun. I don't think I've ever read a series that is crass and funny and also puts to light some things that fantasy characters a lot of times don't have to deal with. And I've really enjoyed it. those are all of the books that I have read for this episode of Chonky Check Ins. I have a couple of numbers that I want to share with you guys though. One is how many pages were read in this episode, and that is 6,140 pages were read total. That is an average of 614 pages per book. My average rating was a 4.125 star. So I think that this series is very successful for me. The fact that I had 4 5 stars, 2 4.5 stars, and 2 4.25 stars, and only 2 books that aren't in the 4s and the 5s, I think is incredibly telling of my reading tastes. I love to get into the nitty-gritty of the worlds, and I need to be able to connect with the characters for a longer span of time in order for a story to really ingrain itself in my heart. And so I'm going to continue this. I'm excited. And I actually am already working on 2 more for my next episode. I'm currently in the middle of Wind and Truth, and I also am in the middle of Fury of the Gods. So I will have 2 more to add to whenever I get to the next episode. But I hope that somewhere along the line you either found a series or a book that you are interested in picking up. What chunky reads have you read recently? Let me know in the comments down below. If you are not feeling chatty, leave me a brick emoji to constitute chonky, or if they don't have a brick emoji, leave me something that you think constitute a chonky read. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you have a lovely evening, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!